This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Catherine, and I are talking about what we're reading and going a little deeper into that, talking about how we pick the books we actually read. But before we get into the topic, we would love to do an episode where we answer your writing questions. So here's the thing. Go to iTunes, leave us a review, and put your question in that review. All right. So what are you reading?
I'll go first then, all right.
I know, crickets begin chirping.
Well, I have a real mixture at the moment. So I'm keeping a non-fiction stream going, which is mostly finance related, and mainly because of that my stage in life and some thinking about retirement, but not in the stopping work point of view, but just from a point of view of how we juggle everything. So that's quite dense. And this will, the reason for me mentioning this will become more apparent. Even though that some of the books are, great narrative nonfiction, kind of Malcolm Gladwell, big idea stuff, which is great. They can be quite gripping. In fact, the one I've just started, which is really interesting and beautifully written, is called We Need to Talk. And it's about a young couple who started at Microsoft in the early 90s. And they both had stock options as part of their salary, which was unusual in the day. It was done, but not to the degree that Microsoft did it. And then the husband, they obviously got married, and the husband decided to leave Microsoft on a fairly sort of high risk position at a young startup that was dealing with selling books online. And so with one early in at, or both early in at Microsoft, and one as one of the very first few people in Amazon, they came into wealth that they never ever expected, and it's a fascinating glimpse on how that challenges your psychology and what it does to your friends and family. And I'm only a little bit into it, but it is non-fiction in the most perfect storytelling fashion. It's really nicely done. You really get a sense of who these people are, what they were thinking, and a little bit of, what you can understand what she was experiencing. It's written from her point of view, in that you think, oh, that's a bit precious, wondering about, how much you need to spend on a house. And, when there are people starving in the world, you can get very righteous reading it. And it's really interesting that a non-fiction book about coming into wealth can stir that sort of emotion. So anyway, some of these things can be quite, they really make you think about your own personal situation. So I want to escape from that. And so I have to have fiction going at the same time. I really feel bereft if I've all of a sudden got a run of nonfiction and I'm not in the middle of some fiction. I start to get desperate. And I do subscribe to most of the book promotion email services. So, BookBar, Free Booksy, Bargain Booksy, Kindle Books and Tips, Book Barbarian, Pixel of Ink. Have I missed any? Can't remember. And so they're good because they do give you little ideas. Occasionally I'll click through and look at the reviews is usually what I'll do. I'll click through and see, not necessarily if they're all 5-star, but just to get a feel for what they're saying in the reviews. Is it my type of book? And that I find is important. And very occasionally I'll do a look inside. So it definitely comes down to, for me, some escapism when it comes to fiction because of the fact that I want to balance some nonfiction. And I'm currently reading, these are fascinating books. And they started, the first one was written in 1964, but they do appear occasionally on these email mailing lists. And so I see them and they've got an intriguing cover. So that goes to show how interesting it is. And they're the Rabbi Small Mystery Sleuth series. And it's set in a small town somewhere outside of Boston, and he's a rabbi in a small country town synagogue. There's a lot of politics between him and the board of directors on the temple. And being Jewish, I understand some of the issues in there, but it's fascinating how it's cute. I don't know if you would understand it totally if you didn't know something about Judaism. But he acts as a sleuth, so he ends up solving murders and things like that. And sometimes it's hilarious the way he does it, because he'll say, and the chief of police is sitting in his office with him, and they're musing over what on earth really happened. And then Rabbi Small thinks, there's something in the Talmud, and he pulls the Talmud out and finds some particular part and delivers almost a sermon that solves the murder. It's very unusual. And a bit wordy in places, but as I said, I think if you're interested in the Judaic view of the world, and it doesn't ram it down your throat by any means, far from it, but it does go into a fair bit of detail, so you'd have to like that. But they're very interesting, very different books. They're not unputdownable like the Spencer books I found. So I just had to, digest them instantly like junk food. But you do get transported into a world, and that is clearly, a writer's art. So they're not for everybody. And I'm learning some interesting things about how you can get away with delivering a fair bit of exposition and still make it interesting, because of the nature of the characters involved. So yeah, I picked it because it looked a little intriguing. I thought, that's how do you write mystery sleuth stories around a rabbi? That's cool. I'll check that out. And so I went and looked at the reviews, and okay, I'll try that. And now I'm just finished book 6 last night. So there you go.
Oh wow, 6 of them. When you read a series like that, do you like to read them all back to back, or do you like to intersperse them with different types of novels?
I like to read them back to back. I can't help myself. It's a little bit like having a bar of chocolate in the fridge. Once I start it, there's no stopping.
I see.
If it's good, obviously, I probably wouldn't continue on a series otherwise. It's just something about the brilliance of writing that makes you not in a novel want to know what happens next, and in a series want to know how it plays out.
Does the rabbi have a character arc over the series? Does he change?
Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. There are parts where he gets really annoyed with the temple directors, and they have a falling out, and then there's issues with the contract, and then he abruptly decides in one book, I'm not spoiling anything, in one book that he's just going to take a 3-month sabbatical and go and live in Israel. And so you get a whole book set in Jerusalem, which is really interesting. So it's clever. And there you see his clash with his conservative form of Judaism up against some of the more orthodox and some of the lifestyle things that are very different in another country, the way that a religion is practiced in another country. So you get setting changes as well, which if that was a fantasy series, it would be like going to another land and understanding how their magic is practiced. So there are the sort of, analogous things there. So yeah, a very definite arc, yes.
Nice. What are you reading, Catherine?
That's me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
I'm kind of in a weird spot in terms of my books. I just finished some stuff for myself. I'm reading a little bit of nonfiction. I do not read as much nonfiction as Robert does. But I've been listening to a podcast, so I picked up a book they were recommending. It's totally a parenting podcast because I'm in the teenager stage, so I'm learning what I can. But I also am in the middle of reading some early middle grade stuff with my daughter. So we're listening to some stuff there, and it's really interesting to try and pick out middle grade stuff for my young kid, because she really loves listening to stories and she's really into it. So we've been listening to audiobooks in the car. So I want to find something that's not too long, because it needs to hold her attention for enough time she can follow the story. But also she's smart and she wants to have a good story. So it's been interesting kind of trying to like navigate that, like by reading descriptions of saying, okay, well, the main character is not too old and they're not dealing with something that I would find, too hard to explain to her if she needed to have it explained. And they're, not dealing with something that I don't want her exposed to yet. And, all these different things. So it's really interesting to try and pick books that and I'm enjoying them too. I'm very entertaining reads, but also that I can handle with my 3-year-old. So it's a very interesting time of life for me in terms of my reading, but yeah.
Summer is in full swing here at StoryWorks. In fact, if you can hear birds chirping in the background, it's because I've moved my office to the deck. And the StoryWorks reading series is coming back in September with new episodes. This is a reading period right now, and we are still open for submissions, so please get your stories and essays in. storyworkspodcast.com/submit so that we have time to give you full consideration and hopefully schedule your reading and interview on the StoryWorks Reading Series podcast, a podcast for readers, writers, and readers curious about writers. We give voice to your story and you.
So
That's where I'm at.
what issues are middle grade novels covering? I'm really curious what you have to sort of weed out.
So the ones that I'm like focused on, I want to be more adventure based, but not monster antagonist scary based, right? So it's more about the kid going on a journey and experiencing something and, maybe with their best friend or find, stuff like animal companions are really awesome because I know that the animal's not going to necessarily be scary or frightening. But yeah, it's more about adventure and less about like direct conflict. Because as soon as the conflict comes in, then I know she's going to be like, oh, Mom, that's scary, or he's scary, or I don't want to hear about him, or, whatever. So yeah, it's hard to pick through though, because antagonists are part of fiction. So finding one that is less scary and more like need to work through or get past kind of a thing is kind of where I'm going. So yeah. I also picked up Alina Sayre's novel because I know her and she's a friend, and I was like, middle grade adventure story about a girl who's a pirate. I'm picking that up. So I've been reading that to her. And so I kind of like know the morality behind that. And I know what the girl's going to go through is not going to be something that I'm going to have to explain in a way. Right. I wanted to just enjoy it and to experience stuff without having to have it, explained on the back end by Mom. I just want her to enjoy the story and learn from it on her own, and to have those moments of, revelation and enjoyment. So anyway, that's kind of,
Yeah. Are you finding there are vocabulary issues? Because a 3-year-old and a middle grade reader, really interesting.
Well, here's the problem. Her dad and I talk like adults who are very well read. And we have her entire life, and she's been around a lot of adults who have fairly large vocabularies. So she knows a lot of words that I don't necessarily like. I go, do you know that? And she's like, oh yeah, I got it. No problem. Or she's really good at context, figuring it out. So I've only had to explain a couple of vocab issues with her, but most of the time I'm just like, well, what do you think it is? And she's pretty close. So
nice.
Yeah, I don't limit her in terms of her vocabulary very often. She's pretty smart.
Yeah, we never did that with our daughter either.
Yeah.
One of her first few multi-syllable words was stegosaurus.
Oh yeah.
She knew the little creature, and so we never talked baby talk or anything. We just used long words when we wanted to.
I think Aria was 18 months old saying, "You're ridiculous."
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I think it's extraordinary what those little sponges pick up.
Mhm.
And I love the fact that you're doing it on audio, because then you don't get the issues of mispronunciation when they learn big words. Because I remember talking to Isabel when she was much younger, and I must have rattled off a word. She said, "Oh, is that how you say it? I always thought it was whatever in my mind." So sometimes you can go, I've done it myself. You go a long time thinking a word is said a certain way. I can remember, this is legendary in our family because we had one of these cars. We had a French car, a Peugeot, but for years I thought they were called Piguets. So I mean, and this was living in England, how I'd not heard anybody say it, but maybe I'd heard them say it and it didn't even register because I didn't realize what they were talking about. So yeah, listening to it is great.
The one that really surprised me that she was following it is we were on a car trip a couple weekends ago, and I went and just scrolled the library really fast. I was like, oh, what can I find? And I found James Herriot's collection of children's stories, and nice. Vet, right? And oh my gosh, the language in there is intense. It is not dumbed down at all. And I'm all, do you know what's happening? And she's like, yeah, he's finding a kitten. That's all you really needed to know. That's great, and so she didn't throw her off. And even if she probably didn't understand some of it, the accent issues, and in addition to the language being old fashioned, it doesn't diminish from the story. So there you go.
That's cool.
Things you learn.
Yes.
And what about you, Alida?
Oh, I have a follow-up question. So are you going to start writing stories for children?
Come on, I'm a writer. I've thought about it.
It's a different art.
I don't know. It's a very different art.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see your children's fiction one day.
It'll be co-written with my daughter.
Yeah, well, my daughter, she was 9, and she's 18 now, but she was 9, and when I got inspired to start writing, and I said, oh, wouldn't it be fun? So I remember, and I wrote late middle grade, so tweens, and which has definitely got darker aspects. But I did learn that middle grade is definitely all about the hero, being the hero of their own story. So the adventure stuff, as you say, really important. Whereas as soon as you get into YA, you're into the identity crisis, which is why often they're so angsty.
Right.
You don't want any angst in middle grade. It's all about saving the world or saving their friends, And I remember I had this idea, oh, that's a good idea. It's one of those how a scene comes to you. So I wrote this scene, and then I gave it to Isabel and said, what do you think? And she read it. And she's a voracious reader. Oh, it's really good, Daddy. Oh, good.
Yeah, I know, right?
And then the next morning she said to me, it's a bit amateurish. Oh, thanks.
From the 9-year-old.
Yeah. But it did end up being a 3-book middle grade series. So, and from there I learned how tough, because I thought, I'll start with children's books. They've got to be easier, haven't they? Like every writer thinks. No.
No. No, yeah. My daughter right now will orally tell stories to us. We'll sit at the dinner table and she starts getting fidgety, and I'll say, well, tell us a story. And this is pretty much every story that she tells. So I was walking in the jungle and I was being chased by a tiger. Oh, and then what happened? Well, the tiger wanted to be friends. Okay, and then what happened? Well, we went and found a cave and we played hide and seek. Okay, and then what happened? And then the bear came. Oh, was the bear friendly? The bear was friendly. So the tiger and the bear and I were playing hide and seek. And that's what happens. So and you can just spool her along. Oh, well, did the tiger do this? Oh, no, the tiger didn't do that. The tiger, and she just will go and go and go. So I say I have to co-write with her someday.
Yes.
Her ideas are endless.
So, Alida, how do you pick what you're reading, and what are you reading?
So right now I'm reading Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. And I picked it because it was recommended. It came up a couple of times in conversation, and then also one of my friends is reading it. So I thought, oh, well, that'll be kind of fun to read it at the same time. Chat about it. Although I'm like 150 pages in, and we haven't really had much to say about it yet. It's interesting. It's beautifully written, but I don't love the way chapters are only a couple of pages long, because I'm with this character, then I'm with that character. Then
you
I'm
want
with
to
this,
spend more time. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so you get all of these like moments, and they are moving the arc forward. They aren't just vignettes or tableaus. They actually do move the arc forward, each of them. So they are well crafted, but I find the characters aren't as engaging. They aren't earning as much empathy from me as they would if I was with them. If I had 10 pages with a character or 7 pages or something, and really fell into that scene or few scenes with them. And then because they are so short, it's really easy to read quick and put in a bookmark. So I might read 3 chapters, but that didn't take long, and it's not like, oh, I have to get to the end of this chapter. This is so good. What's happening right now? And then you've read 10 pages and then you're like, oh, wait, I want to see now. Where's Werner? Okay. And then 10 pages, I might read 3 chapters, but I've only read 6 or 7 pages instead of 20 or 30. And so it's easy to walk away from that way, which I find somewhat unsatisfying. It's not as engrossing as I want it to be and as I expected it to be.
Yes, I agree with you there. It's because it's a slowly unfolding story that I felt had some inevitability. You didn't know what was going to happen, but there was definitely a feeling of inevitability. And perhaps the slicing it up into 2 small segments there, juxtaposes incorrectly a slowly unfolding story with what is generally a fast-paced style. So it'd be fine if it was a detective novel or a science fiction adventure or something like that, where you want that sort of choppy chapter style. But you're right. From memory, I think that might change later in the story, where you get longer segments. I don't remember. I loved it anyway. It's it's, as you say, it's beautifully written. It's in.
Do you have a craft question you would like discussed at the StoryWorks Roundtable? Then we have an offer for you. Head over to iTunes specifically, and help us with our search rankings and discoverability by leaving a review. Within that review, pose your question. We will be going through these reviews, pulling out those questions, and in an upcoming episode, we're going to answer them all. We will have a Ask Us Anything StoryWorks Roundtable episode in the not too distant future. So head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and pose your question. We can't wait to discuss your most pressing craft concerns. Come back next week as we continue our conversation about what we're reading, including All the Light We Cannot See and how much we love it and don't love it at the same time. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.